Reverie is a game developed by Rainbite Limited, a New Zealand-based indie developer. The game draws inspiration from two notable Super Nintendo RPGs. One look at a screenshot of the game will tell you exactly what games those are. This game looks like Earthbound and Zelda began dating, got married, had a baby, and raised its little Earthbound Zelda babies in New Zealand. But does this game hold up to the counterparts from an era past? Well, before we get started looking into that, I would like to let you know that this game was received for free for Indie Christmas on Twitter. The goal of Indie Christmas is to get independent games exposure and to give the developers and fans feedback as well as a chance to play some really fun games. The final bit that I want to get out of the way is there may be some minor spoilers in this video, so if you want to avoid spoilers, please consider subscribing to the channel and checking out my other videos in the meantime. And thank you for stopping by. With that out of the way, let's get started. First, let's talk about the story. In Reverie, you play as Ty, the youngest sibling in his family, who is going to visit his grandparents on Taromi Island, a fictional island in New Zealand. Unknown to him, the island's inhabitants are about to be in danger when four angry spirits cause the island to violently shake, blocking the volcano and possibly damaging the homes of the people living on the island. Of course, this setup for the game's story is not without its flaws. Firstly, aside from your grandfather telling you that he felt spirits of the island growing in power, there's no immediate cause for alarm from your grandparents. The only people who seem to be really worried about it is a construction crew, who is tasked with clearing out the rock slide caused by the island's sudden tremors. The other inhabitants seem to be spending their time relaxing in the ocean, or going about their daily routine. That is, except for the food truck, whose owner seems to be MIA, and nobody seems to be concerned about it one bit. Regardless, your grandparents seem to be hopeful that you'll relax during your stay with them. There is no talk about you being some great hero. Instead, upon completion of the first dungeon, which is the dark basement of your grandparents' house, you find your grandfather's old book, which contains stories of his adventures. This prompts your grandfather to wish for you to explore the island, and let your imagination go wild as you create your own adventures. And thus the story begins. Overall, the story of the game seems to be the weakest point of this game. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, though it does make the game a little confusing. Is this adventure all the imagination of a child exploring the depths of the island, or are we truly saving the island from great peril? With that out of the way, let's talk about the gameplay. Much like Zelda, this is an open world adventure title with action combat. It's got dungeons to explore and treasures to collect. Also like Zelda, the controls allow for you to map your secondary items to additional buttons, in this case allowing you 2 secondary items to be equipped at one time. In addition to your sword and your side weapons, you've also got the ability to dodge roll, which you may find yourself forgetting about as you play through the game, although in later dungeons you may find it a requirement if you hope to survive. The game itself is short. It's got 5 dungeons total, 4 which need to be completed to beat the game, and a 5th bonus dungeon that you may choose to complete after the credits roll, to finish up any remaining achievements you have left. The dungeons are filled with enemies and puzzles, and each dungeon gets progressively more challenging, building on the skills you've learned from the previous dungeons. By the time I got to the 3rd dungeon, I found myself confused by some of the puzzles, however, and this is mostly due to the fact that the game doesn't hold your hand. When you are supplied with a new secondary item, there may be a few uses of this weapon that aren't apparent from the beginning, but once you understand its uses and how they apply to the puzzles at hand, you get a real sense of accomplishment. Each dungeon has a mid-level boss and a final boss, with the exception of the 3rd dungeon, which went the route of heavy puzzle solving in lieu of a mid-level boss. Every boss consists of simple mechanics that you typically learn to use throughout the dungeon to overcome obstacles. Some of these bosses can be cheesed, however, such as the mid-level boss in the 4th dungeon of the game, by simply standing next to it and just swinging your sword as fast as possible to kill him, hopefully before he kills you. The most challenging combat you will find is in the bonus dungeon, which comes after you complete the main game. The bonus dungeon is a series of rooms with progressively challenging fights based on rooms from each of the 4 main dungeons, some of which include 2 copies of the dungeon's mid-level bosses thrown in to test you before you move on. The exploration and overall design was fun. Each area has its own look as well as tasks to complete. One of my favorite tasks was simply exploring the beach just south of the town and finding a cave in the water that had a bird feather in it, as well as a lizard who called himself Smog and threatened to destroy everything. It was fun, and it was cute, and made that moment of collecting a hidden treasure very memorable. Speaking of hidden treasures, spread throughout the world and the dungeons are feathers from birds seen mostly around New Zealand and Australia, or so my wife informs me, as she is the bird nerd in the house. Unfortunately, unless you plan on 100%ing the game, collecting all the feathers will really only help you in completing the bonus dungeon, as the final feather you will collect is located roughly 80% of the way through the dungeon. That being said, the item is super invaluable for completing the dungeon, and indeed saved me from not only dying in the final room, but also from destroying a controller. And this is where I'll segue into the really important part of an adventure RPG, and that's the controls. For the most part, the controls are a standard 8-direction movement with somewhat smooth combat. Unfortunately, combat can feel a little slow in later levels because you will find yourself swapping between secondary items every time you enter a new room, just to complete the puzzles and destroy the enemies within the room. I feel like possibly combining the dodge roll button and the action button would have freed up an extra secondary item slot, allowing you more action and less downtime. Additionally, there were moments when, upon completing puzzles, the camera would show you that you opened a door. During the scene, the game restricts movement to your character, but the game doesn't check if you're holding a movement button down once it restores movement, and so you have to lift up off of the D-pad or the joystick and then try moving again. It is a small annoyance, but it is annoying nonetheless. Lastly, we can't talk about this game without discussing the art. The graphics in this game is charming. I appreciate the style they went with, giving us a style inspired by Earthbound. It only seems logical considering both games are from a modern setting, ditching the typical high fantasy style from most adventure games. This mashup of art direction and gameplay should be enough for most nostalgia seekers. Unfortunately, some of the enemies start to become overused after some time. There is some variation in color and sometimes pattern changes, but for the most part you will spend a lot of time killing rats and hornets. The music and the sound effects in this game are pretty well made as well. There isn't really any particular song or sound effect that stand out to me as something memorable though. They all seem to really fit their intended use at best, and I didn't find myself getting a tune stuck in my head. That's not to say the music was bad though. In fact, one of my favorite songs is first introduced in the 3rd dungeon. Its slow melody sounded pleasant and fit the mood for a dungeon pretty well. With all that said, how does this game stand up to the games that inspired it? Well, the developers at Rainbite Limited did a great job. The game is a solid entry to the action RPG genre. Despite it being rather short, as it only took me 7 hours to complete the game 100% and earn my platinum trophy, this is one of the few games that made me actually want to go to discover everything, and the fact the game is only $12.99 on the PlayStation Network store, it's worth every bit of that. Even with the flaws, it is well worth your time and attention. It is surprising to me that I haven't heard of this game until this week, considering the game came out in May of this year. Do yourself a favor and get this game. If you are one of the 5 people who still own a PS Vita, you will be happy to hear that this game is also a cross-buy game on the PlayStation Network store, so you'll be able to take it with you on the go. So, thank you guys for watching today's video. This was a fun video to make, and I had a blast playing Reverie. With the holidays being here, this will be the final video until January. On top of that, with the new year coming, I have considered new things for the channel. I would like to create more videos like this one, putting a spotlight on independent games as well as other gaming related videos, particularly survival horror games. I might even give YouTube streaming a shot. With that said, in order for me to keep this going full time, I can't do it without your help. Like this video, share it, and let people know about this game and the video. Additionally, if you'd like to support me further, I do have a Patreon. I have created a few tiers over the past few months, and updated my backer perks to include access to my very own Minecraft server, as well as monthly backer Q&As, weekly posts, 2 Patreon-only videos, shoutouts at the end of my videos, and more. Backer perks start at $1. That said, hitting the subscribe button is free, and it will let you know when I've uploaded a new video, YouTube algorithms withstanding. I appreciate all of you for stopping by, happy holidays, and stay salty, friends.